Ready to dive into some Nietzsche. We had tons of requests to unpack. Thus Spake Zarathustra. And, well, let's just say it's not your typical philosophy.
Yeah.
It's dense and fascinating, and it's kind of like Nietzsche just took all these wild ideas and threw them into
A philosophical blender.
yeah, exactly, a philosophical blender.
It really is a unique work. It's more of a philosophical novel, really. It blends like ideas and storytelling in a way that's both challenging and captivating at the same time.
Yeah, I've heard it described as one of the strangest products of modern German literature, which is saying something.
Right.
But it also has these interesting echoes of other works like Piers Plowman and Pilgrim's Progress. I mean, who would have thought that a 19th century German philosopher would be riffing on these medieval theological themes?
It's really a testament to the enduring power of these questions, right? About meaning, purpose, and how we navigate the world. And Nietzsche definitely wasn't shy about drawing inspiration from different sources. Goethe's idea of Bildung, or self-cultivation, also plays a big role in Zarathustra.
Right, it's all about that journey of becoming,
Yeah.
of pushing ourselves beyond our limits. And speaking of journeys, we can't forget the book's namesake, Zarathustra himself. Now, he's borrowed from Zoroastrianism, but Nietzsche isn't really concerned with the religion itself.
Yeah, he's using Zarathustra as a sort of mouthpiece, a prophet for a new age, one where God is dead.
Hold on right there. God is dead. That's one of those Nietzschean bombshells that can really throw people off.
Yeah.
What's he really getting at with that statement?
It's a provocation for sure.
Yeah.
He's not saying there was a literal God who died. It's more about the decline of traditional religious belief and the values that went along with it. He's asking, what happens when those old anchors of meaning start to drift away? What do we replace them with?
So it's less about atheism and more about this sense of, like, disorientation.
Exactly.
Like we've lost the old map and now we're trying to navigate by the stars.
Exactly. And that's where the core of our deep dive comes in, the three metamorphoses. It's like Nietzsche is offering us a new compass, a guide for how to navigate this world without the old certainties.
Okay, let's unpack these metamorphoses. It's like a roadmap for this whole becoming thing, right?
It is, and it's crucial to follow the sequence that Nietzsche lays out. The camel, the lion, and then the child. Each stage builds upon the previous one, so we need to understand them in order.
Okay, so starting with the camel.
Yeah.
What's the deal with this beast of burden? Is this about just blindly accepting everything we're told?
Not exactly. Think of the camel as representing that part of us that carries the weight of tradition, all those shoulds and musts we inherit from society and our upbringing.
Right.
It's that initial phase where we absorb the values and beliefs of our culture without questioning them too deeply.
So it's like that feeling of carrying the weight of expectations, maybe even feeling a little trapped by them.
That's a great way to put it. The camel stage is about recognizing those burdens, understanding where they come from, and acknowledging the role they play in shaping who we are.
But surely Nietzsche isn't advocating for just staying a camel forever, right? There has to be more to it.
Oh, absolutely. The camel is just the starting point.
Right.
It's about acknowledging the weight of the past before we can move on to the next stage, which is where things get a bit more ferocious. Enter the lion.
Okay, here's where it gets interesting. The lion. You're talking about rebellion, right?
Yeah.
Breaking free from those burdens.
Precisely. The lion represents that fierce spirit within us that starts to question those inherited values and expectations. It roars no to the things that no longer serve us, demanding the freedom to create our own path.
So the lion is like the inner rebel, shaking things up, tearing down the old structures that are holding us back.
Exactly. It's about asserting our own will, our own values, and refusing to be defined by what came before. It's about carving out our own space in the world.
This lion imagery is really powerful. It feels almost dangerous. Is there a risk in all this roaring and rebelling? Could we end up just tearing everything down without building anything new in its place?
That's a crucial point. You've hit on the potential danger of the lion stage. Unbridled rebellion can lead to nihilism, a rejection of all values, simply because they're from the past. But Nietzsche isn't advocating for mindless destruction. He wants us to use that lion energy to clear the way for something new, something better.
So how do we avoid falling into that nihilistic trap? Is that where the child comes in?
Exactly. After the rebellion, the questioning, the tearing down, comes the creation. The child represents a fresh start, a return to innocence and openness. It embodies the creative spirit that can forge new values, not based on what came before, but on a genuine and joyful engagement with life.
So it's not enough to just break free from the old ways. We
Yeah.
have to build something new, something authentically our own, and that requires the playful, imaginative spirit of the child.
You got it. The child is the artist, the innovator. The one who sees the world with fresh eyes and isn't afraid to experiment, to play, to create.
Okay, I'm starting to see the whole picture now.
Yeah.
It's a progression
Yeah.
from accepting the burden to questioning and rejecting it to finally creating something new and unique.
And it's important to remember that these metamorphoses aren't linear. We don't just move from one stage to the next and then stay there. It's a constant dance of back and forth between these different forces within us.
Okay.
We might find ourselves tapping into the camel's resilience one day, the lion's courage the next, and the child's creativity the day after that.
It's like we're carrying all three of these figures within us, and they're constantly interacting and influencing each other.
Exactly. And learning to recognize these different aspects of ourselves to understand when each one is needed is a key part of this whole self-overcoming journey that Nietzsche is laying out for us.
So what does this all mean for us, for the listener who's trying to make sense of their own life, their own struggles, their own search for meaning? How do these animal metaphors actually translate into real-world action?
That's the question, isn't it? And it's one we'll continue to explore as we delve deeper into Thus Spoke Zarathustra. What's fascinating about the three metamorphoses is how they connect to some of Nietzsche's other big ideas, like eternal recurrence and the will to power. They all weave together to paint this picture of self-discovery and self-overcoming in a world without God.
You know, it's funny you should say that. When you were describing the camel earlier, it reminded me of how we often just absorb the values and expectations of the world around us without even realizing it.
Yes.
It's like we're on autopilot carrying those burdens without really examining whether they truly belong to us.
That's a great observation. And it's a crucial part of the camel stage. Recognizing those inherited burdens, we need to acknowledge them before we can even begin to question them.
So it's like taking inventory of all the shoulds and musts we've accumulated along the way.
Exactly. And once we've done that, that's when the lion can emerge. Remember, the lion is all about questioning, challenging, and ultimately rejecting those burdens that no longer serve us. It's where that will to power kicks in, that fierce drive to assert our own individuality and create our own values.
But doesn't that will to power sound a bit aggressive? Like, are we all just supposed to go around roaring and demanding our own way?
That's a common misconception about Nietzsche. The will to power isn't about dominating others or imposing our will on the world. It's a much more nuanced concept.
So it's not about becoming some kind of power-hungry tyrant.
Not at all. It's about a more fundamental drive. The drive to grow, to overcome, to express ourselves fully. Think of it like the force that pushes a seed to spread a flower to bloom. It's that inherent life force that compels us to become all that we can be.
That makes a lot more sense. It's about reaching our full potential, not about controlling others.
Precisely. And that potential can manifest in countless ways. For an artist, it might be creating a masterpiece. For a scientist, it might be making a groundbreaking discovery. For someone else, it might be raising a family or building a community. The will to power is simply the energy that propels us toward those goals, whatever they may be.
So if the camel is about acknowledging those inherited burdens, and the lion is about questioning and rejecting them, where does the child fit into all of this?
The child emerges from the ashes of that rebellion, that questioning. Once the lion has cleared the way, the child can begin to create something new. Remember, the child represents that fresh start, that openness to possibility.
So it's like the lion clears the land and the child comes in and plants the seeds for a new garden.
That's a beautiful analogy, and it speaks to the importance of both stages. We need the lion's courage to break free from the old, but we also need the child's creativity to build something new and beautiful in its place.
But isn't there a danger that we could get stuck in that lion stage, caught up in all that roaring and rebelling?
There's always that risk. That's where Nietzsche's concept of eternal recurrence comes in.
Ah, yes. The idea that everything happens over and over again infinitely.
Yep.
That's a real mind bender.
It is, but it's also a powerful tool for self-reflection. Imagine knowing that you would relive every moment of your life, every joy, every sorrow, every triumph, every failure for all eternity. Would you choose to spend that eternity stuck in a cycle of rebellion and negativity?
That's a heavy question. It really makes you think about what's truly important, what values you would be willing to embrace for all eternity.
Exactly. And that's the power of eternal recurrence. It forces us to confront the consequences of our choices, not just in this life, but in all possible lives.
This is like a cosmic gut check, making sure we're living in alignment with our deepest values.
Precisely. And that's what helps us move from the lion to the child. We realize that true fulfillment doesn't come from constantly fighting against the world. It comes from creating something meaningful, something that brings us joy, something that we would be proud to relive over and over again.
Okay. I think I'm starting to wrap my head around this. The camel represents that initial acceptance of inherited burdens. The lion rebelled against those burdens, and the child emerges to create something new. And the idea of eternal recurrence helps us avoid getting stuck in any one stage, pushing us toward that ultimate goal of self-overcoming.
You've got it. And all of this plays out in vivid detail indeed. Thus spake Zarathustra. Nietzsche uses all sorts of symbols and metaphors to bring these ideas to life.
Speaking of metaphors, I'm curious about those other characters you mentioned earlier, the last man and the backworld's men. They seem to represent different pitfalls we might encounter on this journey of self-discovery.
They do. The last man, for example, is the epitome of complacency. He's given up on striving, on creating, on becoming more. He's content with a life of comfort and mediocrity.
He sounds kind of depressing.
He is, and that's Nietzsche's point. The last man is a warning, a cautionary tale about what happens when we abandon our will to power and settle for a life of ease and triviality.
So he's like the opposite of the Übermensch, the one who's giving up on the whole self-overcoming thing.
Exactly. And then there are the backworld's men, those who cling to outdated beliefs and illusions, even when they've been exposed as false.
It's like they're afraid to face reality, so they retreat into these comforting fantasies.
Precisely. And while it's tempting to dismiss them as delusional, Nietzsche challenges us to understand their motivations. Why are they so afraid of the truth? What are they trying to protect themselves from?
That's an interesting question. Maybe they're afraid of the responsibility that comes with creating our own values. It's easier to just cling to the old ways, even if they're no longer working.
That's a great insight, and it highlights the challenge of this whole self-overcoming journey. It's not always easy or comfortable. It requires us to confront our fears, our doubts, our own shadow side.
So it's not just about becoming stronger or more creative. It's about facing the parts of ourselves that we might not like or want to acknowledge.
You got it. And that's where things can get really tricky. Because sometimes the biggest obstacle to self-overcoming isn't something external, it's something within ourselves.
It's like we're our own worst enemies sometimes.
Exactly. And that's why Nietzsche's philosophy is so challenging, but also so rewarding. It forces us to look within, to confront our own limitations, and to ultimately become the masters of our own destinies.
Okay, so we've talked about the camel, the lion, the child. We've talked about eternal recurrence and the will to power. But there's one piece of the puzzle that I'm still struggling with. The Übermensch.
Yeah.
I mean, this word gets thrown around a lot when people talk about Nietzsche, but what does it really mean?
Yeah, it's definitely one of those terms that can be easily misunderstood. Sometimes it gets translated as Superman, which I think can be misleading.
Yeah.
Because it conjures up images of, capes and tights, which is not at all what Nietzsche had in mind.
Right. It's got to be something deeper than that.
Exactly. The Übermensch is more of an ideal, a goal to strive for. It's about embracing our full potential as human beings, pushing beyond the limitations of conventional morality, and creating new values that align with our truest selves.
So it's not about becoming superhuman in a literal sense. It's more about transcending those old ways of thinking, those inherited limitations that are holding us back from really becoming who we are.
You got it. And here's where those three metamorphoses that we've been talking about come full circle. The camel, burdened by tradition, that's where we start. The lion breaks free from those burdens, roaring its defiance. And finally, the child, with its innocence and creativity, builds something new and beautiful out of the ruins of the old.
So the Übermensch embodies the strengths of all three. The camel's resilience, the lion's courage, and the child's creative spirit.
That's a great way to think about it. The Übermensch is like a synthesis of these different aspects of ourselves, all working in harmony.
But it's not like we reach some endpoint and suddenly become the Übermensch, right?
Yeah.
It's more of an ongoing process of becoming.
Exactly. And that's what makes Nietzsche's philosophy so challenging, but also so liberating. It's a call to constant growth, to a perpetual striving to become more than we are. The destination isn't really the point. It's the journey itself, the constant pursuit of self-overcoming.
So this whole journey, these metamorphoses, this striving to become the Übermensch, it all sounds pretty daunting. What advice would you give to our listeners who might be feeling inspired, but also maybe a little overwhelmed by all of this?
I would say start with Thus Spoke Zarathustra itself. Read it slowly. Read it carefully. And don't be afraid to reread passages that resonate with you or challenge you. Nietzsche's writing is dense and layered.
Yeah.
There are multiple meanings and interpretations.
Like he packed an entire universe of ideas into this one book.
He really did. And the beauty of it is that you can keep revisiting it throughout your life and discover new insights each time. But beyond reading, I think the most important thing is to engage with the ideas actively. Don't just passively absorb them, question them, debate them, wrestle with them, make them your own.
It's like he's inviting us into a conversation.
Yeah.
Not just lecturing us from on high.
Exactly. And remember, it's okay to disagree with him. Nietzsche himself was a controversial figure, and his ideas are not meant to be universally accepted. He wanted to provoke us, to stimulate our thinking, to inspire us to see the world differently.
So if you're feeling a little intimidated by Nietzsche, don't worry. It's all part of the process. Embrace the challenge, ask the tough questions, and most importantly, have fun with it.
That's the spirit. Because ultimately, Nietzsche's philosophy is about celebrating life in all its fullness, the good, the bad, and everything in between. It's about embracing the challenge of becoming who we are, even if that means facing our deepest fears and uncertainties.
Well said. And on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into Thus Spake Zarathustra. It's been quite a journey, but I hope you've come away with a new appreciation for this really extraordinary work. And as Nietzsche himself might ask, if God is truly dead, what will you create in his place? That's something to ponder as you continue your own journey of self-discovery and self-overcoming. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.